Hey everybody, my name is Ian. I work at the Fort Worth Public Library in the Panther Lab Makerspace, and I love to make things. In fact, today I'm going to give you a deep dive informational video about how to use half square triangles in order to create quilts. It's a really fun technique and it's great for modern quilting. If you want to learn more about how to quilt or more information about quilts in general, you can check out the Libby app. We have lots of different books and magazines available for you on there that you can start doing your research and get inspiration for maybe a quilt that you want to make. Half square triangles are a lot of fun in modern quilting, and you may be asking what's the difference between like modern quilting and traditional quilting. With traditional quilting you have a lot of repeating patterns, very similar muted colors, things of that nature. With modern quilting you can use very bright, vibrant colors along with asymmetry. That is a big key to working with modern quilting, is the asymmetry, bright colors. Lots of fun. Now in modern quilting, when you're talking about a half square triangles, you're talking about a simple square of fabric that has been cut in half, so that way you have one type of fabric on one side that forms one triangle and then another piece of fabric on the other side to form another triangle. In fact, you can use this pattern or just about any other pattern, because remember, you can take those half square triangles and put them 4 different ways. So you don't have to make a pattern like you see mine. You can actually create all sorts of optical illusions using those half square triangles. Whenever you're starting to plan your quilt or whatever you're going to be making using half square triangles, think about like, what colors do you have in your fabric stash? What patterns do you have in your fabric stash? What can you use to create those intricate patterns that are created whenever you line up the half square triangles in different directions? Half square triangle quilts are great because they're easy for kids, so you can get the kids involved designing, creating, using markers, crayons, colored pencils, all those kinds of tools. For today's lesson, you'll need some basic sewing knowledge, whether that be by machine or by hand. You'll need to know how to sew. You'll also need some of the basics for sewing like thread, scissors, things like that. So let's go ahead and start at the beginning. How do you design a half square triangle quilt top? Whenever you are wanting to put together a quilt, usually the first thing that you work on is some sort of design. So I'm going to start by kind of sketching out a design idea here on some graph paper. You can find graph paper either online, or this one actually came from my printer. It had a graph paper sheet already programmed into it, and I just had to tell my printer to print it out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my graph paper, and I'm going to use a ruler and split them into half square triangles in a pattern of some sort. I'm not exactly sure which one I want to do yet or how I want it to look, but that's part of the fun, is getting to design it however you want it. Since I'm making an example one, I'm going to make it pretty small, so I'm going to make it 5 squares wide and then 4 squares long. So that's going to be 5, 10, 15, and 20, which is about the number of half square triangles that I'll have for today's project. So I'm going to go ahead and just outline the big portion of my quilt, or basically the outline of what my quilt will look like. Okay, now that I have the outline of my quilt specified, I'm going to go ahead and take my ruler and I'm going to split these squares into triangles in a design that I think will kind of highlight the half square triangles and how they flip-flop back and forth. It really is up to you. You can design it however you want. You'll just split each square into a half square triangle set. Okay, now that I've sketched this out, I'm going to go ahead and use a highlighter to designate which side of my blocks are going to be the pattern fabric, and then which side of the blocks are just going to be my white fabric. But you can use this in any way that you want. If you want to use multiple colors, if you want to use multiple patterns, it's really up to you and your imagination. So go wild, use those colored pencils, use those markers, use whatever you want to designate which area is going to be what. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight these blocks over here as my pattern. So I want anything in blue to be some of the pattern fabric, and then anything that is white will be some of the white fabric. Okay, now I can kind of see my plan and what I am going to need to do to put this whole thing together. So let's go ahead and start getting our fabric ready. Okay, I have my fabric now. I have some pattern fabric, and then I just have some white fabric. Whenever you're doing this next step, you want to do this on the lighter of the two fabrics, or lighter fabric of whatever you're using, so that way you can see it. It definitely won't work if you're wanting to draw a line on black fabric. That's really hard to see and not going to work very well. So usually you pick the lighter of the fabrics to draw on, and today I'm going to use a friction pen. This one is really great because it's an erasable pen that when it heats up, the line disappears. So this is great for working on fabric. You can also use a washable fabric pen as well. These are easy to get online, and they work really well because they wash right out. You can even use something like a pencil, or in a pinch you could use a washable marker like a Crayola marker or something like that. Just make sure to wash it as soon as possible, and definitely don't use the red color. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my pattern fabric off to the side, and I'm going to grab my white fabric. And it may not be easy to see here, so let me grab something so that way you can see it a little better. Okay, I just grabbed a piece of black paper so that way you could see my white fabric a little easier on my white tabletop. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to take a ruler, and we're just going to go from corner to corner. I'm going to take my pen or whatever you're using to mark with, and I'm just going to follow the center line on my fabric just like this. Again, this will come right out as soon as I put heat onto it. So I'm just going to draw from corner to corner. I didn't get it quite exactly right, but that's okay. It's not about perfection. It's about the fun of completing the quilt, right? So, all right, so I'm going to do the same thing again. It doesn't matter which corner you're going to, just as long as you're going from one corner to the other. And we're going to do this to all of our pieces of white fabric. In my case, depending on what you are doing, all you have to do is just make sure that you are doing one set of your squares. One thing I did forget to mention is whenever you're drawing a line on your fabric, you want to make sure to do that on the wrong side of the fabric. This white fabric doesn't really matter because it doesn't really have a right side or a wrong side. If you're using a pattern fabric like this one, you'll need to flip it over and then draw your line on it. Because remember, whenever you're sewing, you want wrong side to wrong side. So what I'm going to do, or right side to right side, wrong side's on the outside basically. So I'm going to put my pattern fabric down first. I'm going to put my white fabric on top of it like this, and then we're ready to take this over to the sewing machine. Okay, I have my two fabrics together. Remember, wrong sides on the outside, right sides together on the inside. We're gonna now sew a 1/4 inch on either side of our line, right? So on both sides, we wanna make sure to have a 1/4 inch seam allowance on either side of our line. And I'm going to show you how to do that here on my machine. Your machine is probably going to be a little bit different. Don't be intimidated. Each machine is a little different, and you might have to work with yours a little bit to figure out where that 1/4 inch is. Don't forget, you can use a ruler to see where the needle's landing and see how much of a distance that is. And a lot of machines have it already marked on the machine so you can see where that 1/4 inch is. Let me show you. So looking on my machine here, this line, which is getting ready to go into our feed dogs, this line is my 1/4 inch. So I'm going to line up my blue line with that 1/4 inch, and I'm going to sew on one side, and then when I come back, I'm going to sew on the other side. Or if you just flip it around, you can use the same one to get the other line done. So we're just going to push it through just like this. Also, my machine has some more guides down here. So on my plate here, I have a 1/4 inch on either side, with this line being the center line. So you can use all of these to help you figure out and how to get that 1/4 inch whenever you're sewing. Now that you've gotten your squares sewn up, we have 2 half square triangles ready to go. They just need to be cut apart now. So what you're going to do is you're going to cut on this center line. You can either use a nice pair of sharp fabric scissors, or you can use a rotary blade with a acrylic ruler. I would not recommend using a office ruler or anything of that nature. I would really highly suggest using a acrylic ruler. That way it protects your hands, and also office rulers weren't intended for rotary cutting, so if you were to accidentally jump up onto the surface of your ruler, you may end up cutting into the ruler or something more dangerous, which we don't want. So make sure that you have a nice cutting surface to work on if you're using the rotary cutter. So cutting surface, an acrylic ruler of some kind, and then your rotary cutter. So what you would do is just line your edge of your ruler up with the edge of the line. Take your rotary cutter, open it up so that way the blade is sharp and ready to be used. Just go ahead and cut straight down that line that you drew, and now you have 2 half square triangles ready to be pressed. Now that I've gotten my square cut into 2 parts, that's why we did the 1/4 inch seam on both sides of the blue line, so that way when we pulled them apart we had 2 separate pieces that are now half square triangle units. When we open them up, they look like this. And now we need to press our seam so that way it's going up against the darker side of the fabric. So if I push the seam this way underneath the darker fabric, you won't be able to see it under the white fabric. If I pushed it towards the white fabric, like if I laid it down and pushed this fabric towards the lighter side, you might see, especially if you have a darker color, through the white fabric, and it would not look as nice. But it really doesn't matter a whole lot. Just, you know, kind of work with the material. The best practice is to press towards the darker fabric. So we're just going to press our seam over onto the pattern fabric for my quilt. The easiest way to press our seam is to take your iron. I'm using a small iron, but you can use any size iron, and start off on the fabric that you want the seam to go away from, and then hold up the fabric that you want the seam to be pressed towards, and then gently press that seam while you're holding the fabric. So kind of like that. Let's do that again. It's going to be really easy. I'll show you. So we're going to take our fabric. Again, I'm going to press it towards my darker fabric. And this fabric has a little bit of a, needs to be pressed a little bit because it's, there we go. All right. So now what we're going to do is we're going to open it up, and I'm going to hold between my index finger and my thumb, I'm going to hold the fabric that I want to press towards. And I'm gently going to press my iron towards that side. There we go, just like that. And now you can see it's pressed towards the darker fabric. Once you finish pressing everything, you'll need to go back and cut off these little corners. We call them dog ears. You'll just take a little scissor and snip that part off. All right, remember our drawing that we started off with? We're gonna go ahead and start laying them out to represent the drawing. So I have my half square triangle needs to go this way. And then my next one is gonna go like this. So we have the pattern going this way. And now I'm gonna take my next triangle. I'm gonna piece it together like this. And then our next one, I'm trying to alternate the pattern. Let's see, did I do that right? Nope, sure didn't. Got to do it like this. There we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, and we have one more. And that's going to go this way. So here is my first row. I might change it out because I do have some yellow fabrics and this is all blue. So kind of play around with it and get to a pattern that you like. Once you get that all laid out how you want it, you'll just start sewing each of these half square triangles together. So I would sew these two together along this line. I would sew these two together along this line. I would sew those together and put my last one on. There's many ways that you could do it. You could do it all sorts of different ways. You just want to make sure that you're following your pattern and making sure to sew on the correct edge to make your individual rows. Alright, I have sewn all 5 blocks together, and as you can see, it is coming together nicely. Don't worry if you see these little spaces right here. This is your 1/4 inch seam allowance. So whenever you're sewing your next row onto this row, that will get hidden in that seam allowance. And you should get pretty close to perfect points. And so I'm going to keep putting my next row together, and I'll just keep going all the way through. Now that I've gotten everything put together, I'm gonna flip them onto the back, and you'll see that we still have our seams kind of going in any direction. What you wanna make sure to do is you want one row to be going in one direction and the next row to be going in the other direction. So basically for this one, since it only has 4 rows, I might press my seams on this first row to the right, and then on this row to the left. So that way, whenever these two seams come together, they're laying on opposite directions, and it makes it a whole lot easier when you're wanting to actually quilt, so that way there's not a whole bunch of layers bulked up underneath the needle. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to press these to the left or the right, depending on the row, and then we can sew our rows together. And there you go, a very nice start to a quilt top, or maybe I could turn this into a pillow. You don't even have to start making a quilt. You can make pillows, you can make all sorts of different things that may be a little smaller if you don't have all sorts of material. This is a small little, basically sample pack of different patterned fabric, so you can create all sorts of different things using small amounts of fabric. It's a great time to bust out those stashes of fabric that we all have if we sew, and get using those wonderful pieces of fabric to create something brand new. Don't forget that the Fort Worth Public Library has a great resource of all sorts of different books and magazines that you can check out using the Libby app to get designing and get creative. I hope you enjoyed today's video, and don't forget to check out all the other great videos coming out on the library's social media channels.